I think that the most important thing when looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls to try and understand the Jewish society and what was going on at that time is to realize that the scrolls are a collection of manuscripts that don't just tell us about the people who assembled them on the shore of the Dead Sea. That's why the whole debate, which so many people think is the most important thing about who these people are, what name we're going to call them, are they Essenes or not, is a lot less important than what we can learn from the manuscripts about the varieties of Jewish thought and the approaches to Judaism that are going on at the time. So to give a small example, we have here some of the earliest Jewish Hebrew prayers to be recited by people who are saying daily prayers. Now, if we look at those prayers, we're not sure really if these were authored by the people who collected them at Qumran, or if they're just there because of the fact that they got into that collection, or maybe they were authored by someone else and they actually said these prayers. But we get a window into the development of daily prayer and what types of things were being asked for and what kind of formularies worked and how the thing operated. So that's just an example. I could stretch that example to virtually any subject we mentioned. Let's take Messianism. We have varieties of Messianism. We have two kinds inside the Scrolls group. And we have the people who just believe in a Davidic Messiah, which obviously is the basis of later Jewish and Christian Messianism. We have people who expect two Messiahs, a Messiah of Aaron, kind of priestly Messiah, and we also have a what we call an Israel Messiah. Now, this priestly Messiah has certain effects in both Judaism and Christianity, and we can trace it later on as a kind of secondary thought process, if you want to call it that. And that's the type of thing we can get from the scrolls. So I would say that's the first thing. It's virtually any type of subject we're going to take that has anything to do with Jewish religion or Jewish thought. We're going to find certain approaches in the scrolls, some of which were those of the sectarians who actually gathered the scrolls, and some of other Jews. Now, another very, very important subject, which often we forget when we're teaching classes about the history of Judaism or even history of Christianity as well, is the Bible manuscripts. Because the Bible manuscripts tell us a tremendous amount about what the Hebrew Bible was like when the people at Qumran, say in the 2nd and 1st centuries, or mostly the 1st century BC, what they received. And that gives us a lot of better ability to understand what we find about how the Bible is being understood and how it's operating both in rabbinic literature and in the New Testament. Not because we find that there's just one text and it's being passed on. Rather, we find there's a process of standardization going on that hasn't been completed that we can trace in the history of Judaism. And Qumran is like sort of the beginning when it seems like it's very unstandardized. And when we look at this, we understand things like quotations of the Talmud that don't match, and quotations of the Hebrew scriptures in the New Testament that don't really match, and stuff like that. And then when it comes to biblical interpretation, when we see different kinds of biblical interpretation, say Jewish law interpretation helps us to understand the Midrash and rabbinic tradition, and this type of interpretation in Qumran called Pesher, where you take the Bible text, the prophetic text, as if it applies to your own time and your own events, and that has some connection with fulfillment prophecies in the New Testament. So we can use this material in many, many ways to enlighten ourselves about what was going on religiously at the time. Now, I just want to say one word about the who the people were issue, because it does have some importance. It seems from what we know now, after studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, that there are two basic varieties of approach to Jewish law. And these are the one that we could call Pharisaic rabbinic, and the other one which we could call priestly, Sadducean. These approaches are both in evidence in the scrolls because the scrolls people follow the priestly one while opposing the other one. And because of this, we can trace certain things in later Jewish law to this period. But what's really interesting is to realize that there's a big, big argument going on at this time about, in general, how to understand Torah and how to interpret questions of the Bible in regard to Jewish law. And this underlies a lot of later discussion in rabbinic literature. So that's a very important thing. But on the other hand, it's also true that the group that we could call the Qumran sect, which most people do identify as the Essenes, most scholars do, whether I totally agree with this or not, but most people do to make that identification. This group Well, on the one hand, it represents this kind of priestly approach to biblical interpretation and Torah law. It clearly moves to become highly radicalized vis-a-vis apocalypticism, vis-a-vis the disdain for outsiders, and the good and evil approach where everything is either, it looks like it's either all good or all bad, and all the rest of that stuff. So we do have to remember that we have the opportunity also in the scrolls to